Now, a little while back, I made a theory video about how Rey in Star Wars could be something like the character of Aang from Avatar: The Last Airbender, that she had the ability to enter into something like the Avatar state like he does, and in a sense she could join with the Force and become extremely powerful with it, which is what I theorized we saw her doing towards the end of The Force Awakens, when she was able to just close her eyes, let the Force in, and then easily defeat Kylo Ren. Anyway, at the time of making that video, I had just started to watch the show, having finished only the first of its 3 seasons, and since then, well, I've finished watching the whole thing. So what this short series of videos is going to be, and there will probably be 2, maybe 3 of them, is part review, part analysis, and part comparing and contrasting the show and the story that it told and its characters with the Star Wars sequel trilogy and its story and characters. And before I really get started here, just know that if you've never seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, this video should still be relatively easy to understand. Also, I highly recommend checking it out. I know some of you might say you don't watch cartoons, and to be honest with you, I don't normally go out of my way to watch them anymore either. But I will always go out of my way to experience a great story, no matter what format it might be in, whether it be a movie, television show, comic book, novel, video game, cartoon, or animated show as some would prefer it be called. I'll happily check it out as long as it has compelling characters and is a great story. Which may lead you to ask, just what exactly would I consider a great story? Well, I could say something as simple as one that entertains you, or I could try to sound more profound and say that it's one that says something about life itself and the experience we all share living it, one that manages to connect with us on a deeper level and finds a way to say something to you about you. But really, the easiest way to know if a story is great or not is to ask yourself these questions while or after experiencing it. Do you truly care about the characters? Do you root for and maybe against them? Do you feel the highs and lows with them? Do you get frustrated at their failures and relish their victories? Do you weep tears of joy and pain along with them as they progress on their journeys? And do you long to see more of them when the story ends because you feel like you're losing a friend? Well, if the answer to those questions is yes, then you're experiencing a great story, and Avatar: The Last Airbender does all of those things. In fact, it's all around one of the best, most complete, and well thought out stories I've come across in quite some time. And the depth of characters, the complexity of the story itself, and the vast world building are all top notch and pulled off exceptionally well over the course of all 3 seasons. Though yes, like with almost any show, not every episode is a gem, and there are some that are more filler or more frivolous in nature. But even those manage to be fun and entertaining in their own respect, and don't have you wanting to skip to the next episode. And then when you consider how popular this show was with the younger generation of the time, and the older generation too, it blows away this silly notion that kids can't recognize and appreciate good writing and well thought out stories and characters. Yes, it does have a childish feel to it, you could say, and at times it can even be a bit slapstick, but the characters are so intriguing that it's all just part of the charm, and it works far better here than in another animated show I've watched as of late, that being Season 1 of Star Wars Resistance, which could learn a lot from Avatar: The Last Airbender. But Resistance isn't the only Star Wars property that should watch this show and take notes. The sequel trilogy could also learn a thing or two from this show, especially in the character development department. And I know what you might say, that Avatar had 3 seasons to slowly and efficiently develop its characters, and the sequel trilogy has had only 2 movies and hence it's not a fair comparison. But honestly, that's a terrible excuse. Many fantastic, fully fleshed out and developed characters go through terrific, memorable arcs in the span of just 1 movie. The Star Wars sequel trilogy has had 2 so far, yet one of the biggest complaints I hear against it is that the characters are poorly handled or are just boring. Now, do characters in a multi-seasons show have an advantage? Of course they do. But a truly great movie, or trilogy of movies especially, should be able to create amazing characters in the shorter time frame. Okay, so let's now move on and start comparing the characters, and in this first part we'll be focusing primarily on the 2 main characters from each, those being Aang from Avatar and Rey from Star Wars, 2 characters who are very similar in many ways, with both being extremely gifted and powerful individuals who just tend to have things come naturally to them. And before we even meet either one of them in their respective stories, they've both lost their families, or the equivalent of their family, and then will have to quickly put their trust in newly formed friends to help them on their way when we do finally pick up their stories. Both are also like chosen ones, and will have some sort of greater destiny or purpose to fulfill by the end of their story. Both seem to be inherently good and kind by nature, and genuinely care and want to help those around them for no other reasons than it's right. However, the big difference between the 2 in this category is that Aang knows who and what he is and what his greater purpose is from the very start. He knows he is the Avatar and what that entails thanks to his previous training, and when he awakens after being frozen and asleep for 100 years, not only does he learn how bad things have been because of his absence, but everything he cared about was destroyed by the Fire Nation. And though as the story goes on, he'll learn more about what the Avatar is and how it works, and he'll also need to learn how to ultimately win, from the very beginning he clearly understands, as do we the audience, what his goal is, which is to learn the 4 forms of bending in order to defeat the Fire Lord and bring an end to the war. He also has a personal reason to accomplish this, since it was the Fire Nation who destroyed those he once cared about, those he failed by basically falling asleep in a block of ice, thus allowing the Fire Nation their chance to take over. And in this story, none of his motives, personal or otherwise, are ever a mystery to us or in question, and accomplishing his goal is also essentially how this story will end. For Rey, though, it's much different. When we first meet her, she has no clue she's anything special. In fact, she believes the opposite to be true of herself. And as she goes along, she not only has to discover her purpose and what's special about her, but the story must give us a reason for the character to actually care and fight in the first place. In other words, just because some higher power, or the Force in this case, bestows her with power, doesn't mean she's automatically going to do what she's supposed to do. Now, in The Force Awakens, she quickly gets swept up in an adventure and is in the middle of something much bigger before she can even realize it, though the whole time she speaks of just going home and waiting for her family, because not until the very end of the first movie does she realize or maybe embrace this idea that maybe there is some sort of purpose she's supposed to fulfill. And of course, this first movie ends with her seeking out Luke Skywalker, who she hopes can give her some answers, though she still really has no idea what she's doing or why. She's just going with the flow, more or less. And ending this first movie, or first act of a 3-part story, which the sequel trilogy is, hanging on such a mystery is not a bad thing. We don't need to immediately know absolutely everything about Rey and her purpose or what motivates her in the first place, just as long as we still can connect with the character and find her interesting in at least some respect. In fact, if done right, it's fine and even preferable to leave some things hanging and to have people excited and curious to learn more. It's great when we can slowly unravel a mystery with the character that we care about and share in their excitement or dread when they learn more about themselves. The key, of course, is that the delayed payoff is worth it, and that eventually we do get a clear understanding of the character and their place and purpose in the story. Which now leads us to the middle act for both these characters. And for Aang, it's season 2 of the show, and for Rey, it's The Last Jedi. And in both stories, both these parts do, or attempt to do, exactly what they're supposed to in the middle, which is drag the character down to a low point in order to push them to a breaking point so that we can have a change in them or a growth. This part of the story is usually the ultimate test for the main character. And for Aang, it's primarily the loss of his giant flying buffalo Appa that tests him and brings out anger and irrational behavior in him, and he even abandons his friends for a time in search of Appa. And even when he later rejoins with them after failing to find Appa, he's still not himself and is willing to put everything else on hold until they can find him. And this all works very well as a test that will ultimately lead to growth, because for one, it's pretty much the first time that being the Avatar and being super powerful doesn't do him any good whatsoever. Being a master bender isn't going to help him find the missing or kidnapped Appa. And since he's been portrayed as a bit arrogant and sure of himself, and that sometimes this can even lead to recklessness that hurts others, like when we saw him start learning firebending and he burned Katara, we understand why he's so frustrated at this point, because he's gotten very used to quickly and easily solving all of his problems or dilemmas, usually thanks to his bending or the ingenuity of his friends. But this time his friends can't help him either, and so he begins to become angry and despondent, and even begins to turn on them. And since we've also seen brief flashes of what you could call childish outrage out of Aang before, and do remember he is a kid, and we've even seen him fully embracing his anger and entering the Avatar state, we really fear for him or what he could now become if he keeps going down this path, because we've grown to care about the character and want the best for him. Furthermore, we also care about his friends that he's partly blaming for the loss of Appa, and so we fear that the sometimes childish Aang might do or say something out of anger that will bring great harm to those other characters that we also care about. All in all, this brings a great degree of tension not only around trying to find Appa, but because of what Aang might do next as he gets more and more frustrated. And it's all handled very well by the story, and ultimately is one of the things that helps Aang come to a better understanding of himself and who he wants to be, which leads to the dilemma he'll face in the 3rd season about wanting to stop the Fire Lord, but not wanting to kill him to do it. On the other hand, for Rey in The Last Jedi, her great test is the sudden desire to save Kylo Ren, or Ben Solo, which leads her to the rash decision of going to him right into the flagship of the enemy fleet to try and save him, after having a few talks with him and learning that, depending on your point of view I suppose, that maybe Luke Skywalker betrayed him and almost killed him in his sleep one night. And of course, one of the big problems with this is the suddenness of it all. A few days ago, within the context of the story, she had been captured and interrogated by Kylo Ren, not to mention he had murdered Han Solo right before her very eyes, and then almost killed her friend Finn by slashing his back open with a lightsaber. Oh, and then there's also the fact that he's part of a command structure of a regime that just blew up the Hosnian system and killed untold billions of people. And let's also never mind the fact that Chewie helps her go to him, even though Kylo Ren just killed his best friend a couple days ago, and that he tried to return the favor by shooting him in the abdomen with his bowcaster, and that if Chewie saw him again, he'd probably rip his arms out of his socket and beat him to death with them. But somehow, he believes that Rey is going to bring Kylo Ren back to the light, I guess. Anyway, perhaps the greatest issue with this test Rey faces is what's actually motivating her to go and face it, other than the script. This is not only a pivotal moment for her and this movie, but for the entire story and trilogy, and we have no real understanding what it'll mean to Rey, why she's doing it, or what she stands to personally gain from it. Who is Kylo Ren to her other than a guy she's talked to a few times over the course of a couple days, after all the horrible things he did to her and her friends a few days before? To put it bluntly, what does Kylo Ren coming back to the light mean to her? Why is it important to her, and why is this her great test here in the middle part of the story? After a few brief lessons from Luke, if they can even be called that, does she suddenly understand everything about the Force, the battle of the light versus the dark, and the balance that there must be between them? Does she somehow grasp all of this already, and feel some sort of keen responsibility to do this in service of the Force? Or does she just want to save him because she felt a kinship and is now willing to risk her life to bring someone she thinks has been wronged by Luke back to the light? Is she doing it because she's now romantically interested in Kylo? Or after she saves him, is she just going to say goodbye and they'll both be on their way? Again, just what does she hope to get out of all of this personally? What stakes does she have in all of this? Why is saving Ben Solo suddenly so important to her? Knowing why she's doing this, what her motives are here, is extremely important to the story and our understanding of the character. And unlike Aang in Avatar, it's not clear or easily understood, and it's hard to grasp why this will be transformative to Rey, to learn that, yes, Kylo Ren is indeed the bad guy you thought he was 3 days ago. I mean, we can assume that maybe one of her initial motives to seek out Luke may have been to stop Kylo Ren, who she witnessed doing horrible things and who hurt or killed her friends. But when Luke refuses to train her, she suddenly starts to trust Kylo Ren and believe everything he says over anything Luke is saying because reasons, I guess. Because they have some sort of bond or kinship that she's putting all her faith into after only a couple days. And so she suddenly believes that she can save Kylo Ren if she goes to him because of a vision that she's had, when one of the other reasons why she went to Luke in the first place was because she didn't understand what was happening to her and she thought she needed help. Yet suddenly, she was full of confidence in herself to go right to the enemy and save a straight-up murderer. What happened to the girl who a couple days ago in the story thought she was no one and should just wait on Jakku for her family to come back? She suffers for her idiotic decision to go to him is to just not save him. There was no greater